Okay, good afternoon everybody. Welcome to the webinar on the Competence Framework second edition. You're all very welcome to join us this afternoon. My name is Gill Hancock. I'm the Head of Professional Standards and Knowledge at APM. It's my pleasure today to talk you through some of the changes on the Competence Framework as existing licence holders and what those changes mean for you. We're going to take questions at the end, so if you want to submit those questions as we're going through, I'll answer as many of those as possible towards the end of the webinar. The webinar is being recorded and will be available following on from the session we have this afternoon. Okay, so the Competence Framework second edition. We're just going to have a look at what's changed, why that's changing, and some of the benefits and things that come out of the change in the Competence Framework. The Competence Framework itself hasn't been updated since 2008, so it's in need of a refresh, and that's one of the reasons that we did have a look at the framework to make sure that actually what was out there reflects the needs of the profession. So it's due an update, and the body of knowledge has been updated in the interim time as well, and that covers projects, programme and portfolio management now. So there's a need to update the Competence Framework alongside that. The first edition of the Competence Framework is only relevant to project managers, so it's not inclusive in terms of the wider profession, and that's one of the big things that we wanted to look at again, so it aligned to the body of knowledge but also developed the profession more widely. We needed a resource that was fit for purpose for 21st century project professionals. So that's not only looking at the coverage of the Competence Framework, but also looking at the competencies that are in there and how project management has developed in its broadest sense since the Competence Framework was first developed in 2008. We also wanted to create a platform where we could build our new proposition in line with our 2020 strategy vision. Our Strategy 2020 vision is to live in a world where all projects succeed. So as a professional body, we need to have the resources and the products there to be able to empower those project professionals and give them the confidence that they're actually operating in the space they should be operating, and the success of projects increases. And we also wanted to respond to our customer feedback. Having had the Competence Framework out there since 2008, there was an awful lot of anecdotal feedback about how people were using it, what the good points were, what the bad points were, and for us as a professional body to take that on board and move forward on that. We didn't want just to develop the framework based on anecdotal feedback though, so we did do some extensive research and consultation in relation to the Competence Framework. We carried out a number of focus groups, telephone interviews, face-to-face meetings and online surveys as well. And those focus groups and telephone interviews were with users of the first edition of the Competence Framework, and what people liked about it, what people didn't like about it, but also with people that weren't using the framework to understand why they weren't using it and what improvements we could make to it. That was then followed up with sort of further face-to-face meetings and online surveys as well. And that was done by an independent research company. It wasn't done directly by APM, but we used an independent research company to carry that out on our behalf. The framework itself has been developed by the profession for the profession. Not only did we do an awful lot of extensive research before we started to develop any part of the new Competence Framework, but also when we're in development mode, it was very much led by the profession. So a number of focus groups looking at what needed to be in the Competence Framework and making sure that it met the needs of the profession, rather than just being an internal APM view. And that to me is a really, really important point, that is developed by the profession for the profession, and that development has been facilitated by APM. The research and the consultation confirm the need to extend beyond project managers, and we've included programme management and portfolio management within there to align with the body of knowledge coverage, but also we've included PMO roles as well. And PMOs is one of those areas that we found is not as well defined necessarily as project programme and portfolio management, but it's an area where there are increasing numbers of individuals working within PMOs, and the value of PMOs is being recognised. So we wanted to ensure that we have the competencies there to support those people working in those environments. The new framework needed to recognise differences in job role and project complexity. So one of the things that we found was that a lot of the competencies are very, very similar across the different disciplines, but actually it's the role in which you're applying those and the complexity in which you're applying those that differs. And we needed to make sure that was referenced and reflected in the Competence Framework content. You've also told us in terms of the research that integrating the new framework will take time, possibly as long as 24 months in some organisations, and we fully appreciate that, and that's why one of the reasons why we're having webinars such as the one today. So as the new framework is being launched and released, we can give you information about the contents in that framework, and also some of the transitional periods between the version 1 of the competence framework and edition 2, and how we can support you in that, and there'll be further support that's available. We're not expecting everybody to switch over from one framework to the other instantly. We do appreciate that it will take time, and we're here to support you in terms of that transition. You also told us we needed to make a number of changes to make the competence framework more effective. That's not to say that the current edition of the competence framework is broken. By no means is it broken. There's lots of good stuff within there, but there are also some points that we needed to pick up on, particularly in terms of some of the rating scale, from the 0 to 10 rating scale, and also some of the depth that the competencies went into. So I'll come on to some of those changes that are made in more detail later, but a number of the changes have been made based on the feedback that we were given. So what has actually changed? Well, we've got the updated competence framework. I was saying earlier, it covers project, program, portfolio, and PMO competencies. When we were developing the competence framework, we didn't go in with any preset ideas as to whether it would be one framework or whether it would be a number of different frameworks to cover off the different roles. What came out quite clearly in the focus groups was the fact that the competencies, particularly in project and program management, are very, very similar, but it's the context and the complexity that differs. So it was making sure that that was truly reflected. And again, for portfolio managers, there are some similarities in terms of the competencies, but you might need to know and be able to apply those competencies at different levels. But also there were some specific competencies that apply to portfolio management that don't necessarily apply to program and project management. However, there wasn't a great enough number of these to justify having a separate competence framework for portfolio managers. So that the approach we've taken is to have one base framework, out of which we've developed a number of new role profiles, which I'll come on to in more detail later on. We also have a new rating scale. Some of the big pieces of feedback was around the rating scale and how the 0 to 10 scale wasn't as helpful as it could be. So we now have a 1 to 5 scale that's replaced that. And we also have new complexity guidance. With the complexity guidance, complexity is one of those areas that is quite subjective in terms of how complex something is. And because every single project, program, portfolio is unique in the way it's constituted and the way that it works, to try and have one standard format for complexity gets very, very difficult. So the guidance that's out there now with the new competence framework is giving you indicators and pointers and areas to consider when making a judgment around the complexity of a project, program and portfolio. Okay, so the new competence framework itself, it's streamlined and easier to use. The number of competencies is reduced from 47 to 27. So we had 47 competencies in the old competence framework that covered just project management. We now have 27 competencies that cover project, program, portfolio, and PMO competencies. One of the big differences in those numbers and the way we've approached this is when we were developing the new competence framework, we looked at, we took a very functional approach. So what are the functions, what are the things that need to take place for project management, program management, portfolio management and PMO management to be effective? And we looked at it from that functional point of view. We've also reduced the duplication that's in the competence framework, or taken out the duplication, and we've also brought it to a slightly higher level. So in the edition 1 of the competence framework, there was a specific competence on earned value management, for example. What you'll find in edition 2 of the competence framework is there's a performance indicator around using appropriate tools and techniques for monitoring and controlling your project or your change initiative, which could be a project, program or a portfolio. And it's making sure that we're actually being broader in terms of the coverage, and we've taken out the reference to specific tools and techniques as competencies in their own right. So that's how the number has been reduced. Okay. We have 14 role profiles matched to the new framework, again, which cover project, program, portfolio and PMO. And it's an editable framework which can be easily integrated into existing frameworks or used as an out-of-the-box solution. We're very aware from the research that we carried out and the consultation that we've done is that existing licence holders such as yourselves, for some people who want to use the entire competence framework, for others there are certain competencies that you want to take out of the framework and add into existing frameworks that you have working in your organisations, particularly around the more of the behavioural competencies rather than necessarily some of the technical competencies that are there. So it is a flexible framework, it is editable, you can use the elements that you want to use, or you can use the entire framework and the role profiles as an out-of-the-box solution. It is entirely up to you. We do fully appreciate that you have already integrated the edition 1 of the Competence Framework into your organisations, and we are providing a cross-reference to edition 1 of the Competence Framework as part of the package of the information that's been sent out to you. So that mapping is there, that cross-referencing is there. It's also mapped across to the IPMA ICB, the IPMA's International Competence Baseline. That's the current version of the IPMA's International Competence Baseline that's currently being published. There is a new version of the ICB that's due to be signed off in September this year. And because we've been involved in the development of the ICB, we do have the mapping to the ICB 4th edition, and we will make that public as soon as the 4th edition is published. So that has been taken into account, and that is part of the development process that we've been through. I appreciate this slide is incredibly small, and it just covers off the 27 competencies that are there. So the detail is there. You should have had the competence framework information sent through to you anyway, so you should have this detail. It's just to cover off the 27 competencies. Just to highlight some of those competencies that relate to specific roles, you do have a competence there for asset allocation, which applies specifically to the portfolio roles, and capability development is around the program management roles as well. One thing to point out in relation to benefits management is throughout the performance indicators in the competence framework, you'll see references to benefits management, and it is a thread that runs through the entire competence framework. And the reason for this is because there's no point doing a project program or a portfolio unless you're actually going to be looking to achieve some benefits at the end of it. However, there is also a specific competence on benefits management, and that competence is written from the point of view of a project program, portfolio, or PMO officer or person working within a PMO environment. So it doesn't cover the entirety of benefits management because it's a huge area in its own right, but it is written from the perspective of those roles. And that's in addition to the benefits management statements that run throughout the framework. In terms of what the competencies themselves look like, we have an example competence here. And you'll see at the top, you have the definition of the competence. So in this case, it's the ability to empower and inspire others to deliver successful change initiatives. One of the things you'll notice throughout the competence framework is the use of the word change initiatives, and the reason we've used that is that applies to projects, programs and portfolios. So that's the term that's being used rather than having to write project, program, portfolio out every single time. So you'll see that term change initiative very regularly through the documentation. You then have a section on introductory notes, which provides you a little bit more background to the competence framework. There are a number of documents that we use to inform the development of the competence framework, and the body of knowledge was one of those. So there's a link between those introductory notes and the body of knowledge text, although it's not a word-for-word lift from one to the other, but you will be able to see the link if you compare the two. Following on from that, you then have the application and the knowledge performance indicators. The performance indicators have been written in outcome-focused terms, so it's very easy to say, yes, I have met that, or no, I haven't met that. And we're using the term application rather than experience as we do in the first edition of the competence framework. And again, that's based on feedback that we had from individuals and from organisations during the consultation period, in the fact that you could have lots and lots of experience, but you could have been doing it very badly for a number of years, but it still counts as experience. So the preference was for the term application rather than the term experience. Okay, so that's how the competencies are then formed. The idea of the competencies with the rating scale, so we have a 1 to 5 rating scale that goes from aware all the way through up to expert. And the idea is that you actually score yourself holistically on the knowledge and application criteria. So you have 1 score for all of the application criteria, 1 score for all the knowledge criteria. So you look at all those performance indicators that are there under the application strand, and you make a decision as to where you are on the 1 to 5 scale. Which means if you're scoring yourself against the 27 competencies, you would be scoring yourself a total of 54 times. That's very, very different to the edition 1 of the competence framework, where if you scored yourself on every single performance indicator in the current competence framework, I think it comes up to about 750 times you'd be scoring yourself. So the input and the time it takes to assess yourself against the competence framework is a lot less, but the results are still very, very valuable in terms of what comes out as a result of that. The other big difference in terms of the rating scale is in the edition 1 of the competence framework, it was a question of averaging the scores as you went through each of the indicators. Now, some of the feedback that we had from people that are using edition 1 of the competence framework, and one of the points that we've carried through into development of this edition of the framework, is actually if you're averaging out the scores, then you can be good at, very, very good at one thing and very, very bad at something else, but your average still comes out okay somewhere in the middle, where in actual fact you have an area where you need to develop. So we're not in the position of averaging in terms of the new framework, but actually it's more about the role profiles that sit alongside the competence framework that actually have the ratings for the application and knowledge for each of the competencies that as a professional body we would expect project, programme and portfolio managers to be performing at. Okay, moving on then to the role profiles, they're relevant to all project professionals. We do have 14 new role profiles developed, and we have 4 project role profiles, 3 programme, 3 portfolio and 4 PMO role profiles. And the way those role profiles work is actually looking at the relevant competencies. Like I was saying before, not all of the competencies in the framework are relevant to every single role. But it's taking those relevant competencies and scoring those on the rating scale. So as a professional body, we are standing up and being counted here to say if you are working as a project manager at an advanced level, taking one of the role profiles that's there, these are the competencies that as a professional body we would expect you to be demonstrating, and these are the levels that we were expecting you to be demonstrating those competencies at. That's a fantastic benchmarking tool for any organisation to be able to benchmark their own project management or sort of wide project management communities against where the professional body is saying people should be. And I hope that you see the benefit of that. They can be used by all individuals to understand how they compare against their current role and also potential future roles. And the gaps identified can be used to create support, training and development solutions and form an integral part of the professional development process. By having the competencies written in the way that they are and by having the role profiles that are there, it does facilitate the movement between the different disciplines and also the different roles as well. It does help individuals and organisations plan career paths, training and support that's needed, development that's needed, and looking at how that can all align to deliver greater project, programme and portfolio success. So in terms of the key benefits of the changes, it is a modern framework that can be used as it is or integrated into an organisational framework, so that flexibility is there. And it's in an editable format, so that does provide a very easy transition between the two. There are clearly defined competencies with easily measured outcome-focused performance indicators. So when you have a look at the performance indicators, you will see it's very easy to say, yes, I have demonstrated that performance indicator and I've done it in a certain level of complexity or a certain complexity environment, or within a certain project, programme or portfolio. Okay. It is the trusted professional body point of view. It is APM's view of where project, programme, portfolio and PMO staff should be performing, and it does provide that effective benchmarking tool. So as an organisation you can benchmark all of your project professionals within your organisation and compare that to the professional body view and start identifying any training or development needs from there. It enables project professionals to identify their strengths and development needs. It enables organisations to establish, embed and measure effective project management skills across the organisation, and facilitates the movement between the 4 project professional disciplines. And for me that's another really important point. One of the things that's come out of developing the competence framework, particularly in one of the big areas, is in relation to actually how you move between the different disciplines. There is no requirement if you're coming in as a portfolio manager for you to have been a project or a programme manager beforehand. And a lot of portfolio managers that we've been speaking to and had conversations with actually move into portfolio management from other areas of organisations, particularly more general management or financial management potentially. And for them it's really useful to be able to see what are the competencies in relation to project and programme management do they need to be aware of, and at what level of skills and capability and competence do they need to have those areas. And it's quite stark that in some areas when you look at the role profile, particularly for portfolio managers, that actually the scoring ratings for some of those competencies are relatively low, because it's more important that they know about those areas and they know how they should be done rather than being able to implement those areas themselves. So it's knowing enough to make sure that they can't have a wall pulled over their eyes, but not actually being particularly high level in that competence themselves. So that's one of the areas that are there. But it does facilitate the movement between the 4 project professional disciplines, and people can start planning their careers more readily and more easily, knowing which competencies are relevant to each of those different areas. Okay. So in terms of managing your transition as existing licence holders, well, your existing licence gives you access to all the new materials. So you will have access to the base competence framework, the 14 role profiles, the mapping documentation that's there as well. And you can review the new materials now to be able to plan your transition effectively. As I was saying earlier, we're not expecting everyone to move over straight away to the new framework, but when you see the new materials, you see that it is a much bigger proposition than the current competence framework, and we look forward to you working with the new framework. Your BDM, your Business Development Manager, is here to support you with that transition, so if you have any questions, they are your first port of call. We can come and see you, we can have face-to-face meetings with you, we can discuss the technical detail of the framework with you and support you in that transition, so please do let us know if you have any needs or questions in relation to that. Okay. You don't have to action the change right away, although we do expect everyone to transition over the next 24 months. As I was saying earlier, a lot of the feedback that we had is it will take organisations time to transition over. That's absolutely fine. We are here to support you to do that, but we would expect most people to transition over within the next 2 years. So what are APM doing to support and promote the new competence framework? Well, the competence framework itself was released to existing licence holders on Tuesday, so it's very hot off the press, very brand new. It's 2 days in the marketplace. We have new web pages available on the APM website in the Project Management tab. So the base competence framework content is available under a Creative Commons license for individuals to use, and there's a scoring mechanism that's there. However, if you are using it within an organisation, you will need a license in order to do that. And there are also a number of FAQs that are on the website as well. Again, if there are questions that you have that we haven't answered in the FAQs, then please do contact your BDM and we will get a response out to you from there. In addition to that, from next week, we're doing a much wider marketing campaign, and that begins on Tuesday next week. There's a themed email program based on audience types. There's lots of emails going out with irrelevant messages for the different audiences. We're doing an integrated social media campaign. So that's across LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, various others. We've got homepage banners to promote the new framework, and we're doing a series of 6 themed fortnightly webinars targeting different audiences. So webinars similar to this one will be produced and be available for different audiences to make sure that we're meeting different people's needs and communicating the framework in a way that's relevant to them. Okay, so how does the framework support future APM plans? Well, it creates a platform for all future products and services, including a development pathway towards RPP. It underpins the structure and syllabus for a new qualification currently in development, and it also underpins CPD and wider career development. By having the structure that we have in terms of the new competence framework, and by being able to promote those role profiles and the career development, being able to then underpin that wider career development and the ongoing CPD for individuals is a much, much greater opportunity for us as a professional body, but also working in conjunction with you as organisations who are using the competence framework and the content that's in there. Okay. So what do we need from you? Well, a couple of things in relation to that is to review all the new documentation, have a read through the documentation that you have. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you have any questions. Let us know what you think in terms of the documentation that's there. But also let us know if you would like to be a case study if you are implementing it within your organisation, and if there is the opportunity for us to be able to promote some more partner working with yourselves as an organisation and produce a case study of how you're implementing the new competence framework, then please do let us know, because we'd be interested in talking with you. And finally, if you have any questions, then please do ask your BDM, your Business Development Manager. They are there to support you as a professional body. We're there to support you not only in the transition period, but also future time in terms of using the competence framework and all the surrounding material in relation to that. Okay. I appreciate that's been a very quick run through in terms of the competence framework content, but I did want to allow for some time for the questions If anybody has any questions they want to come in, then that would be good to hear what your questions are, or any initial thoughts on what you've heard today. Okay. No. Okay. Well, currently don't have any questions that have come in at the moment, so that either means that it's stunned silence at the end of the webinar, or actually I've answered all the questions that you have. As I say, your BDM is there as the point of contact. You should all know who your BDM is. Okay. Just being told there are some questions coming through, so we'll just hold on a minute and we'll answer those ones.
We've got one question coming through from Andrew. Do you have any benchmark for data?
Do we have any benchmark for data? In terms of the competence framework content and the people that use the competence framework content, for the new content, no, we don't have the benchmark that's there. We have asked some individuals as we've been developing the framework to measure themselves against the role profiles, and the role profiles have been used or have been developed using input from the corporate organisations and the universities and training providers involved in the development. But as we go through and the competence framework is being used, then it would be useful to capture that data to validate the role profiles that are there.
Okay, we have another question for Toby. When will the RPP changes reflect the new competencies?
Okay. In terms of the RPP standard remains the same for the moment, and the RPP standard is presented in terms of the assessment criteria that you need to complete to meet the RPP standard, and there is a mapping between the RPP standard and the competence framework. One of the pieces of work we'll be looking at later on in the year is reviewing the RPP standard against the competence framework, but in the meantime the standard will remain as it is.
Okay, we've got a question from Andy. Will there be a professional network for those deploying the changes?
We can certainly look at setting up a group or some events for organisations who are existing licence holders. If that would be of interest to existing licence holders, then certainly that's something we can facilitate.
And we've just got another question from Jan. Can you again go through the mapping between the old and the new?
Okay, I don't have the mapping document that I can share with you on screen at the moment, but as part of the package that you should have received as an existing licence holder is a mapping between Edition 1 and Edition 2 of the competence framework. So where those competencies appear in the new framework, you should be able to see that and read that right across in relation to that. Again, if you have any questions once you've looked at that documentation, then please do contact your BDM and we can explain that further if needed. Okay. We don't appear to have any more questions coming through, so I hope you found the webinar today useful. If you do have any further thoughts or any further questions, then please do get in contact with us. We are here to support you during that transition, and we look forward to working with you in implementing the new competence framework and other products that are coming online shortly.